who's on the spectrum.
And my name is Kim Dionne. I'm the co-director as well of the Relationship-Based Autism Center over at CFSS, along with being a licensed counselor, actively working with children and families diagnosed on the spectrum for just about 10 years, working alongside with Paul for that long as well. So we really appreciate the opportunity to meet in this way. To be completely honest, right, outside of this, Paul and I are used to meeting live with people face to face, and throughout this pandemic, we've had to adjust our practice by delivering our services via telehealth. And so this is our first presentation, if you will, online. And so bear with us. We're clinicians. We aren't IT specialists, but we're hopeful that we've worked out any kinks that we think we might encounter. So as we kick this off, one of the strategies that Paul and I use, given the nature of our work, and especially during this pandemic, is the use of humor. Now, humor can be beneficial for some and not for others, but we thought using some gentle humor to get us in the right state of mind would be helpful. So I'm sure many of you have scrolled through your phones, looked at a variety of memes, and if you haven't, your children, I'm sure, have pushed some into your face. And so we've got just a few memes that we found funny and you've probably seen. The first, I've got big plans this weekend. I'm putting a drink in each of the rooms and calling it a wine tour. The second, take a look at this word search. This is where you have been in April and where you might find yourself, at least in the first part of May. Absolutely nowhere. And then for many of you, you might have heard a little version of this.
Lewis, Mom, Mommy, Mama, Ma, Mama, what? Hi.
We appreciate you allowing us to present some subtle humor to you. I can definitely tell you that is what I have been hearing in my household. So moving along, bear with me as I get onto this next slide. There we go. So as Paul and I were creating the agenda for this evening, you know, at the start of this pandemic, as I was listening to all the news media and reading through the health reports and listening to how much of a medical impact COVID-19 is having on the world, I found myself almost saying out loud, when is the news going to start addressing the mental health impact of this pandemic? And I continued to wait and I continued to wait, and eventually it got to that place where folks started recognizing more and more, not just from a medical standpoint, but a mental health standpoint, what uncertain times can really do to a person. And so keeping that in mind, part of our goal tonight is to explore these 4 areas that are on your screen, beginning with how your mental health is being impacted. We're all being affected to some degree by this pandemic, and how each of us are responding to it varies. And because of this, we're going to take some time to walk through how you're self-assessing your mental health. And as we do so, we hope that we move along into a point of normalizing some of this uncertainty, and then ending with some strategies that support healthier mental health. With that being said, we do want to note the following, that increasing your own mental health awareness is a strategy in itself. Awareness is an intervention. Sometimes we are looking for that thing to hold on to, that tangible object, but awareness alone can have a tremendous impact on how you manage your mindset. However, with that being said, we have dedicated some time at the end of tonight's discussion that is going to specifically review some mental health strategies. But throughout some of these discussion slides leading up to it, we've embedded some of those strategies, and those we have color-coded for your reference.
So in thinking about tonight's topic, the two words that kind of popped up and resonated with us was uncertain times. We might not be able to control the flow of the news. We might not be able to control when the vaccines are produced. But the one thing that we can control is the way that we look at the current conditions. So during some of these uncertain times, our frameworks can be tested. So one of the things we thought that might be helpful was creating a continuum to deal with some of the uncertainty. I think each of us have created some anchors that we use every day in our life. And we wanted to be able to share some that we thought might be helpful. So as we kind of go through some of these frameworks, we'll kind of get deeper into the definition and some of the implementation. But these four, from emotional positioning to detoxifying, energy conversion, willingness, and implementation, we're going to touch on each one and give you information around them. So we're going to start with emotional positioning. Emotional positioning varies from person to person. Emotional positioning is the framework that each of us are operating from, the way that we kind of take in thoughts, the way that we orchestrate these thoughts and our interpretation of these thoughts, how we're thinking and feeling about what's going on around us. Emotional positioning is about self-assessment of the way that these thoughts are impacting the way we feel. I don't know about you, but from day to day, some of the way that we're collecting thoughts can have a profound impact on us and kind of keep us on a roller coaster sometimes, or it can feel as though we're stuck. So one of the things that we wanted to take a look at is how emotional positioning, how the way you're thinking, how the way you're processing this and the way you're feeling, what it's doing to you. You know, are you surviving right now, or are you persevering? And I think as we move through this presentation, we'll kind of take a look and asking each of you to kind of take a look at how you're enduring, how some of these things that are happening, they're happening to all of us, but each of us have our own experience around this. What's contributing to each of you is different than what's contributing to us, and how that's contributing to our mental fatigue, and how that's kind of playing into the way we feel. So one of the things that we're really trying to look at today is what it is we're taking in, how it's affecting us mentally, how it's affecting us emotionally. This connection or correlation, is it just individual to us, or is this a global thing? Is it what everyone's experiencing? Because we all right now are experiencing this together. Our starting lines have all been the same. And the finish line to this may be the same or might be different. So we want to kind of look at this and explore together tonight. So we're going to look at emotional positioning in terms of roles. And I think for all of us, and I know for me, just 8 weeks ago, my role was very different than my role today. My role as a therapist, as a director, as a dad, as a friend, was very different. And 8 weeks ago, I was very comfortable and familiar with my role. In fact, so much so I didn't even have to think about it. Today, and beginning of all of this, I had to put a lot of energy into creating this new role that I'm in. Like most of us, we find ourselves moving from, being mom and dad to now being teacher, interpreter, problem solver, IT, pizza person. All of these things have changed. And being able to retrofit ourselves into these roles all at once really impacts our emotional positioning, how we're feeling, the weight of this. And being able to kind of step back and take a look at this journey is what we want to do tonight with you. So some of emotional positioning is based on everyone has a different current living arrangement. What that looks like for each of us is different. Our household size is different. The space we live in is different. Our neighborhoods are different. And I know every day that when I walk out my door, I did not realize that I had this many neighbors. I did not realize, what was taking place in my neighborhood like I do today. And that every time I walk out my door thinking now that I'm going to take a jog by myself, it's actually a block party sometimes. And sometimes I don't want that, right? For a variety of reasons. But that affects my emotional positioning in terms of what I was looking for, look at what I was looking forward to and what I was getting. So when we're moving into these positions, sometimes each of us are playing these roles. Some of us play roles better. I know in the community that we kind of work in, a lot of times we become very specialized as parents. We become very specialized around our knowledge. And as we're doing that, we can be very efficient. And in these times, we're leaning on other people to also be equally efficient with us. And so sometimes in the pursuit of being helpful, sometimes there's more interference than intervention. And sometimes we have to play the role of being a prescriber of who's going to do what and when and what that's going to look like, because we're all managing something that's moving around us right now. And so as part of this, we look at strategies in terms of how do we help each other create more of these transferable skills that are based on our personal strengths. I know in my home, a lot of times I'm going toward things that I'm very right-handed with, and my wife is doing things that she's very comfortable with her left hand, but sometimes we have to partner. But sometimes I have to know that I have to go with what my right hand is in order to make my wife's left hand more efficient. Let's look at emotional positioning from the place of environment. I think I don't have to tell all of you right now that, if I pan the camera around my house, my dining room table would look more like a school right now. And 8 weeks ago, it was hosting a birthday party, retrofitting that environment. In addition to that, knowing how strongly connected my wife is to that dining room, and how getting her to kind of look at changing that dining room into a school took a small miracle, but now we're kind of there, right? And for me to kind of have my children in spaces that were my own private spaces, and now changing that into workspace and changing my thinking around these things. So emotional positioning sometimes is married to spaces that we attach to so strongly, and I've had to find ways now to kind of untether. School spaces are now for work, and now personal spaces are becoming for work, and creating new space is kind of what the journey is here. So one of the things that we look at here is, as a result of the change in space, the way that you are changing is shifting toward the needs, both your needs, both mentally and physically. So as I'm changing my area where I would once kind of do some workouts, we're now using that for arts and crafts. And as I change my mental state around my connection to it, I realize the payoff is greater than the assigned space. So changing my connection to my workspace, my school space, my personal space can help develop a healthier and more productive perspective. And without that shift, sometimes you run the risk of overload.
And as it relates to your mental overload, there comes a time, right, when you're going to need a mental detox. And as we move along that continuum that we first presented and Paul had referenced, right, you figured out a way, or your emotional positioning around the uncertainty and where we're at. But again, the overload needs to be met with a point in time in which you detoxify. And I'm going to address the detox process in a few minutes. But first, want to begin exploring some of the toxics that play a part on our mental health. And the toxics that we're referring to are internal ones, right? The first one being our thoughts. And these aren't general thoughts that I'm referring to. These are intrusive thoughts that are heavy, and that are very much unwanted, right? And as a result, some of these thoughts create a place that we haven't been before. Thought of hopelessness. Maybe this hopelessness is connected to the future. Maybe the hopelessness is current, is situational, it's every day, it comes and it goes. But regardless, it's intrusive and it's bothersome. When you're thinking in a hopeless way, it ends up leading to thoughts of loneliness. Loneliness is a very uncomfortable and a natural state of mind to be as human beings. We crave human connection, and I think what's ironic, given the current nature that we're living in right now, we've realized how much we actually need human connection, even more so pre-pandemic, right? But because those connections have been limited or almost non-existent, right? Because of social distancing and out of protection, it's then created thoughts connected to isolation. These types of thoughts definitely have influence, and they have influence in a big way over our feelings, which is another toxic onto our mental health. Please know that we're not ignorant that we all experience emotions that are positive and negative. But again, we're addressing these toxics from an intrusive level, one that is sometimes unbearable. And so with these thoughts, they create these feelings, right? And one of these that we've been experiencing in our work with families connected to the pandemic is an increase of worry, right? And as our worry continues to mount, so do feelings of fear and despair. So thoughts and feelings have an interesting combination because they end up influencing our actions and our behaviors, right? And I'm not necessarily referring to behaviors from a safety standpoint or a risk standpoint. I'm referring to the behaviors that are daily behaviors that help you manage and navigate your tasks, your activities, your time with your children. These behaviors not only impact others and things, but you. So these intrusive thoughts and feelings and actions, right? They create this mentality that's much like survival mode, right? Now, realistically, many of us might be living in survival mode, right? But there is a difference between surviving and living, and we're going to get to that as we move along. But in survival mode, you're just getting by. You're trying to say, you're saying sometimes out loud, how am I going to do this, right? It's hard to find a pace that feels right. And we have a tendency, unintentionally, right, to look for what's wrong. And as a result, we become incredibly hypersensitive to those that are around you and the environment. I don't know about you, but as I kind of reflect, specifically when creating our talk tonight, I almost chuckled out loud at how often I found myself telling my own children, don't touch your face, or don't touch right there, right? That's too close to your mouth, or that's too close to your nose. Don't use too many paper towels. Watch how much toilet paper, right? Don't waste your food. There's shortages, right? But you almost become in the state of hyperarousal, which is very toxifying to your mental health. And then you start moving down these paths of blaming and more negativity, and eventually leading to shaming. It's really difficult to see the silver lining when you are in survival mode. And then lastly, when you're in this mode, you deal with this guilt, right? As I made this transition about six weeks ago, working from home, I was having all kinds of thoughts of how am I going to do this? How am I going to manage the line of work while taking care of two young children who cannot self-entertain yet due to their age and their current skill set, and allocate the time and the resources that I need to, not only to them, but my work, and then still taking care of me, right? My sanity. And as a result, parental guilt starts setting in, and that feels extremely uncomfortable. And that's that trigger for you that it's time to manage, and it's time to start detoxifying. And so as we begin this starting line of detoxifying those toxics, right? Those thoughts, those feelings, and those actions that are unpleasant, right? We want to start cleansing our mind. We want to mentally declutter, if you will, and that's what we mean by detox. As a result, you begin to learn new things, and it's important to. And for some of you, that might be learning new activities and having the opportunity to insert things that you just haven't had a chance to do, right? For us, we're bringing this down to an even smaller level, yet big at the same time. And here's what I mean by that. As a result of learning new things, you begin to learn what you can live with and what you can live without. You're beginning to figure out how to make do with your resources and what can be postponed, what can wait, which there's a lot of beauty in that, actually. And sometimes it takes the craziness and the uncertainty to really highlight that for us all. Part of this process is the need to protect you before you can protect others. And here's what we mean. Take a moment and think about the start of a flight. And when that flight attendant begins going through the safety information, right? And they get to the point of their safety dialogue around the oxygen mask. What's the first instruction that they give you? They tell you to secure your mask before helping others. Why? Because to be that much more effective and to be that much more efficient, you have to take care of you. You have to keep your mind safe in order to best serve those around you. And that's really difficult as parents to do, but keeping that in mind is a strategy. We've highlighted some of those internal toxics, right? And so quickly as we move through this slide, I want to highlight three external ones. The first one that we've displayed is meltdowns in the home. Paul and I don't need to see you and ask you to raise your hand on how many of you are experiencing meltdowns in the home or meltdowns at an increased rate. Some of those meltdowns might be your own meltdowns. Others might be from other family members. But regardless, it's important that you protect yourself from those meltdowns. And here's what we mean, right? Set boundaries. Don't absorb other people's freakouts. Understandably, that is easier said than done. But remembering that as you are moving along this process that is very new and very unexpected, so are our children, so are our spouses, right? None of us have known what it's like to live through a pandemic. We will now, this will go down in books, right? But keeping in mind that we're all managing this at our own speed and in our own ways helps to create those mental and physical boundaries. Watching and listening to news and social media can be extremely helpful. It can be extremely toxic as well. I remember at the start of this, I found myself tapping into the news more than I ever had. Even on my drive into work, I was tapped into pandemic radio, if you will. And I soon came to realize that that was literally sucking the life out of me, and it was installing so much worry and fear that was impacting my daily tasks. And so with that, you got to take a break from it. You have to limit worrying news. It will be there when you need it, if you need it, right? But knowing that you don't have to have that every single day in order to know what to do throughout your day. And lastly, the coughing, the sneezing, and not feeling 100%. Anytime one of my kids sneezes or coughs, what did my mind automatically do? Jumps to COVID-19 thinking, right? How could this be? Is this the start of it, right? They haven't been out of the house. I've been limiting my contact with people. I've been making sure outside of my talk with Paul tonight, right? I've been measuring my space between people. And so reminding yourself that not every cough is the corona. Noticing that I was becoming almost this disinfectant mom at an increased rate was impacting my energy to be physically and mentally present.
And one of the challenges sometimes is to recognize that we have control over this process of energy acquisition and energy transfer. I think given the nature of where we are all sitting right now, the weight of this current pandemic is exponentially more than doing what you know. Your new routine may be energy inefficient. I think growing so familiar with our day-to-day routine, we knew what we were doing, we knew how to do it. Sometimes it might have been a little bit messy, but it was messy that we were familiar with. We were able to allocate a certain amount of mental and physical energy to it, and we were able to develop currency around it. Having to shift mental and emotional attention more often, being able to go back and forth, being able to allocate from being problem solver to problem calmer, being able to, shift your attention back and forth can be incredibly fatiguing. The distraction of this all creates less drift time and allows less time for recovery. When you don't have that time for recovery, this can equal mental and physical fatigue. So this idea of energy transfer, I don't know about you, but when my doorbell would ring and I know that it was an Amazon box, I'd run out there. Now I have a whole decontamination system going on. In fact, Lysol is taking all different kinds of meaning in my life. In addition to that, I think about this process that I now have and how intimate I'm becoming with the steps of this process, from spraying things to unpacking things to throwing the boxes away to coming in my house, washing my hands, wiping the books or whatever it is, and then thinking about, oh, I just used 4 more wipes, and all of that has got me so connected to a process that is not efficient for me, right? In addition to that routine and what it's delivering into my world, I think about the grocery store every day. I think about that now I know the schedule just as well as the employees, so I can get paper towels, or I can get toilet paper, or I can get necessities, right? That before I could stockpile at will, and the amount of energy that I have to consume in now my new shopping habits, which are now connected to my job, which are now connected to being able to be a dad, all of those things. And then on top of that, remembering to wear my mask, to wash my hands, to sanitize things, and then to make sure that I have my process down. So I ensure not only health, but mental health. So receiving these energies, I just had a talk with a friend today, and he was talking about just kind of some of the looks that he was getting the other day when he walked into Whole Foods without a mask. And here's a person that's a helper, a person that takes care of themselves, a person that is very altruistic. But he said, I felt so bad that I wasn't part of this culture. And then I actually went out and bought all of the gear to not feel the emotional residual. And so, and the fact that he had to unpack this with me and how it impacted, I think we're all going through being able to kind of figure out what the right dosage is, what that looks like, and how it's impacting you. Because at the end of this, none of us, as Kim had mentioned earlier, none of us have been given a training course. Most of the stuff in our lives we prep for, driver's ed, right? School, final exams, all of these different things we prep for. We are all learning on the fly. And as we're learning on the fly, there has to be some grace in acceptance that we are not always going to be so hyper-vigilant, that we're not always going to be so great. And then comparing and contrasting what's going on with other people in your life, and they might get an A in sanitary disinfection, and that maybe that you're not going to. That doesn't mean that you need to absorb all of that. So are people getting into your head? And so as part of this energy conversion, like we have to check, what are we putting in our shopping carts, in our mind? What are we leaving in there? Because it has a profound effect if we are not emptying this cart every day, if we are not unpacking what we have left in our mind. I mean, I might empty my car, but emptying my mind is two different things. And being able to have a set of tools to unpack what I'm doing, okay? And physically check in with myself. Because during this time, anxiety really can take hold of you. As it does that, right, we're often thinking about what we don't have rather than what we do have. And as we're all kind of building new things, we're looking at this idea of permanent versus temporary, and kind of what gets inserted and what gets removed. As we talk about positive things in the form of intervention, sometimes what we are discovering here is something we may not have seen before in a positive. So what you build maybe is something you can maintain. The takeaways can be exponentially positive. Staying in your familiar or parts of your routine can be a lot more energy efficient. And as we talked about earlier, kind of what you were familiar with before and how efficient that is, and now as you're building this, can also be equally familiar and energy efficient. So when you're moving away from survival, are you maintaining it, reconstructing it? Is it staying or is it going? So that evaluative process of what is going to be most efficient, most impactful, and most helpful, but being able to create the structure to do this inventory, and not only just inventory, but be able to do it in a way that's respectful to yourself and kind to yourself, because there's a lot that you have to unpack from day to day. And so with these changes, sometimes it comes to this other part of our framework, which is willingness. I think when this all happened, I think most of us can say that we weren't actually consented, right? That our worlds were going to change. I don't know about all of you, but I didn't get a letter saying, hey, are you willing to change your world? But if I'm being honest, you know, just like when my son was born, you know, I had to make changes around that too. And those changes that I make every day continue to impact me and my family in a way that I would have never discovered had there not been a change. And so my willingness now is drawn upon some of my history, just like all of you, as you draw upon your history of moments when you were met with different types of things that were barriers in your life, things that impose their will on you without permission, that you figured out ways to manage, to move, to go around, right? So all of you have a certain amount of awareness, both from an individual perspective and also a family perspective. So becoming ready to coordinate for the change is what we're talking about. And sometimes this can be situational. Sometimes it's not all of the pieces. Sometimes we're picking just situations. Sometimes we like to look at things in whole pieces rather than to break down parts into smaller pieces so we can manage more. It can be sustainable. I think when we think of COVID right now, perfectionism and COVID-19 don't mix. And how much is too much for all of us, and recognizing the parts of it that just are not a positive return for us. So with that, you know, we're thinking about your mental and physical state are working together. There's a balance, right? And as your willingness to grow and to begin to implement your personal plan and your family plan can make all the difference in the outcome.
So because your physical and mental state, like Paul is saying, is becoming more in sync, you're ready to begin applying specific strategies to support a more positive mental health standpoint. And remember, as we started tonight's talk, we had indicated that awareness comes first, a balanced mindset comes first. Specific tools and systems and strategies are secondary to your mental health, right? And so you will only be that much more effective in implementing any of these strategies that we start rolling through, as long as you feel somewhat more balanced in your mind, right? So as you organize these strategies, it's important to keep in mind who you were and who your kids were pre-pandemic. And what we mean by that is this is a change, like we said, that none of us expected. We know in the future there will be more, and we hope not on such a large scale, right? But we know unexpected events, unexpected moments are going to change. And with that, our kiddos take some time to adjust to change. We take time to adjust to change. And so with that, any strategy that you start implementing, not only for you, but for your family, there might be a gap, right? And that's because time is needed, right? If you had children that were prompt dependent pre-pandemic, you have children that are still prompt dependent during the pandemic and then post-pandemic. And why we're bringing this up is for a specific reason, right? Keeping these things in mind is a strategy to help set realistic expectations for yourself, which will ultimately help with what you expect the outcomes to be. And so this idea of recycling versus reinventing, what we mean by this is sometimes the tool or the effective strategy is glaring you right in the face. The problem, though, and why it's so hard to recognize, is your mental health is interfering. So we're assuming as we're moving into this phase of the continuum, right, this ending point, that you've gained some self-awareness. You've gained awareness around your thoughts and how they impact your feelings and then your behaviors, right? And so some of those tools that you've used pre-pandemic or a year ago might be effective ones today, and that's what we mean by recycling. You don't always have to invent something new and something big. Sometimes you will, though, and there is a time for both. And so that's the difference between recycling versus reinventing, and how you assess and inventory where to start. So as you're in this phase of the continuum, you're moving away from survival, and you're switching gears, if you will, into more of a place of living, something that feels more comfortable. When you have more of your mental health in check, it's really refreshing, and you almost feel this sense of fresh air, and that's living, right? That's the difference between surviving and living. And along with that, you're able to begin pushing the positive. You're able to recognize the good within every day. Not saying there's not negatives, but you're able to start recognizing those positives because you've got an increased mental and emotional capacity. Your threshold of tolerance has expanded because your self-evaluations are more realistic. Because your self-evaluations feel better, you're not judging yourself as harshly. You are recognizing you are one human, right? Managing a variety of changes in those roles and those environments that we talked about during our emotional positioning, because you're evaluating yourself on a more level playing field. You're feeling less fatigued, and then finding that energy to connect. And so these specific strategies that Paul and I are going to roll through, the first, right, is prioritizing. This isn't new to any of you on the receiving end, right? But it's an important one to remember. It's a strategy for mental health. What needs to get done today, and what can be left for tomorrow? What can be left for the weekend even, right? So what's a need versus a want is extremely important consideration when you're trying to prioritize, which ultimately helps you to be realistic about your daily goals, activities, and tasks. I know for me, again, I've got little ones that are 4 and 2 right now, but my 4-year-old is in pre-K, and she's still doing online classes for pre-K and learning about Zoom, right? And I'm doing my Zoom telehealth sessions, and she's doing her Zoom preschool classes, right? And sometimes I find myself saying, I just can't get her logged on today, and recognizing that that's okay. She's gonna be okay tomorrow if she doesn't get that class done today. Taking time for yourself. Notice that Paul and I haven't put on the slide self-care. As clinicians, we know self-care, we encourage self-care, we practice self-care, but it's a term that I think at times doesn't resonate always very well with our families for a variety of reasons. And so we say the difference of self-care versus take time for yourself, and start small with that. 5 minutes, build to more time. 5 minutes of uninterrupted, whether that's tapping into some reality junk TV, or it's just sitting on your back porch listening to sounds of nature. Build to more time. The idea of self-acceptance is a mental health strategy. Give yourself permission to fail. Give yourself permission to make mistakes. Don't judge yourself too soon. Ask for help. When I put this on the slide, I chuckled because time and time again, Paul and I are working with our young people on how to ask for help, the times in which we ask for help, who to ask for help from. But have we stopped to consider that adults really have a difficult time asking for help? But asking for help is a strategy, and it's a wonderful opportunity to also model it to your young kids, and also a way to partner with them. Think about asking your child for help depending on what the matter is, but asking for them to be in a helper position instead of you always being the helper. Lots of power in that. And then separate the week from the weekend. Days are all blurring together. It is hard to separate Tuesday from Thursday, even Friday. And so it's really important to place a distinction between those two time periods. And so maybe that's inserting a special activity on a Saturday that you just don't do Monday through Friday. Many of us are tapped into online church on Sundays, and that's helping create a distinction. But if you're not, really brainstorm as a family. It's a good way to come together on what could we do in the weekend that we just don't get time to do during the week because mom and dad are working and because you've got online school. Create that separation.
And I think as you're creating some of that separation, what we want and what we always hope for is being a good consumer of what information we're taking in. So we want you to be able to kind of limit some of the external stuff that's coming in. And I know sometimes for some of us, we almost feel like we need to kind of check in. Because if we don't, we might miss something. I think it's fair to say, right? When the time comes that this is done, we'll know without having to check in for sure. We want to be able to reconnect to things that you enjoy. I think so much of what we do has been based on these habits that we've been able to build. And some of these habits we're not able to build because we don't have access to them. We're not able to do some of those things. My wife and I were talking about, just the idea of just, going and doing a mall walk, or window shopping or things like that, or, occasionally the, stop in to Marshall's Home Goods. That's a fun little stop, picking up knickknacks, things like that you would do together. What we're doing though is retrofitting some of this stuff because we want to keep you connected, but connected to things that have some equal value, but also keep you safe. Want to be able to stay in touch virtually. And I know for me, this was a big deal because I'm such a people person. Being in someone's space and feeling their energy and being able to connect and kind of feel that, this has been for me a new learning process. In fact, the other day, I was able to connect with 12 other friends to watch the NFL draft. And by the way, what a piece of sanity for anyone that likes football for 72 hours, right? But for most of us, we can create those virtual hangouts, right? Being able to kind of connect to our friends in a virtual format, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, but being able to connect with people and create that time together. Being also able to create boundaries, both physically and mental ones, as we kind of said, being really observant of what's taking place around you, creating some boundaries, because sometimes we get information from people that maybe we don't necessarily want or need to in that day. Sometimes, just like most of us, we have a Rolodex of people that we like to kind of keep connected to. And then we call them and they give us news that, about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we may not need that either. So being able to keep that mental and physical space. Also being able to create some loose routines. And what I mean by that is it has a variety of interpretations. You know, some of us have, I think there are probably many of you that can probably teach executive functioning courses, you know, because you've gotten so good at scripting and molding and creating time around things and breaking things down. And then kind of now with this, it throws our timing off. And sometimes, you know, we're not as dressed the way we want to, or we're not as organized, but yet we have to be online. Sometimes it's okay if you don't look the way you want to look, but you're showing up for something. And then for others, sometimes we've been used to kind of letting things kind of flow a little bit, and now we have to inject more structure. I think as individuals, each of us have to be able to kind of recognize that all of us have these transferable skills. If we can hit pause on some of the emotions, be able to kind of dial down some of the feelings, to be able to kind of access some of the skills that we have used throughout our lives. So I think for each of us, it will help with supporting some of the school stuff that you're doing, the work stuff that you're doing. And then in addition, like Kim said, being able to carve out and build on some personal time and not feeling bad about that you are building, creating some inventory of time for yourself. So incredibly important.
So as we near closure of tonight's discussion, some last thoughts around useful strategies to support mental health is focusing on what you have versus what you do not. As human beings, and research will show this, humans gravitate towards the negative. For whatever reason, negativity creates connection. And even our talks most recently have shifted to talking more about pandemic than what we find pleasure in. And that's understandable to some degree, but sometimes that becomes overload, right? And so focusing on what you have versus what you don't is a helpful activity to do at the start of your day, before the fires get lit, and then even at the ending of your day. Now, to challenge yourself, focusing on what you have versus what you don't after a moment of conflict can be extremely helpful. It creates a quicker recovery and rebound. Consistently reminding yourself that perfection does not exist. It did not exist pre-pandemic. It doesn't exist during pandemic, and it won't exist post-pandemic. But what does exist is getting better with each day. Avoid worrying about what you cannot control. Shift your energy to what you can create. There's a difference between resourcefulness and resources. Resources are things. We don't always have all the things that we feel we need to get through the day. But what we do have is our resourcefulness. That's you. That's your ability to tap into your creativity, to tap into your determination and your perseverance to get through the day. And so when we say shift your energy that direction, right, turn your worry into work. Keep children in the loop. They just as much as us need information. The amount of information they receive and the time of information that they hear is incredibly important, right? Be mindful of the dosage as well, right? But kids are wondering what's going on. They're incredibly curious human beings, and so they need to understand to some degree what is going on. But again, dosage delivery is extremely important. And lastly, not only check in with yourself like we've been talking about, but check in with your children and your significant others to see how they're doing. Often we check in with one another when we think something's wrong, right? And is everything okay? How are you doing, right? And a lot of the times when we check in, we're met with nothing. We're met with resistance. I don't want to talk about it. That's because we haven't checked in enough when things are going okay, and when people appear happy, and when they feel and they appear content, right? So that checking in process is extremely valuable to do in times of good that will help to check in and get more information in times that are not so good. So with that, we end tonight. We hope you all continue to stay healthy and be well. And I believe at this point, we are opening up for questions, if I'm not mistaken, Katie, but we'll kind of wait for your lead there. Thank you so much for everybody who took the time to connect with us virtually tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, be kind to yourself as well.
Thank you both for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Do you guys have any questions? We know that it's kind of nice to sit back and just listen to them talk to us and give us some suggestions. But does anyone have any questions? You can unmute and ask, or you can type into the chat. Either way, whatever you'd like. We can also stop the screen sharing and then we can see everyone if everybody wants to.
Katie, can you see the questions? I see some. I'm just going to say it out loud because I'm reading it.
Go for it.
It says, do you have any ideas for taking time for yourself when you can't take any time away from your kids?
Yeah, well, I think, like we had said, it's challenging, and we know a lot of these strategies can be easier said than done. But again, I think part of that is starting small, right? When really reflecting on when can there be some separation, right? Is that when your child is taking a break from their schoolwork and they're gaining their own relief and they're on their iPad or they're playing their video games, right? Is that a time that you can just step away for a moment, right? The work will always be there, right? Your children will always be there. Maybe that's when they've gone to bed and we just haven't taken that time because now we're in cleaning mode and we're cleaning up the kitchen and we're preparing for the next day. Being able to separate a little bit, again, on a small scale, 5 minutes to then be built bigger.
Yeah, because all you're doing then is you're putting practice into it. And for some of us, it's kind of uncomfortable because for each of us, we have different needs, right? And everyone's needs are so different. And I think part of it, though, is, like Kim mentioned, I think there are certain things that we can use to I think, create some practice. And then it's, I think also, if you're not a person, right, that is comfortable with that, it's almost like having someone help you plan for that. Because it is difficult. Sometimes we do feel like we have to stay connected more than maybe we want or need. But if it is a real need, then also that's something I think, offline we'd be more than happy to spend a little additional time on.
Great, thank you. Someone asked, can you speak more to creating a loose schedule? This is an area I struggle with a lot, but no, it's the best method for our family.
I know, now we're going to do this awkward. Do you want to take this or me to take? So bear with us. So I think a part of what we talk around with this loose schedule is, pre-pandemic, right, we were operating on some type of structured routine, right? From the point of wake up, what our morning routine looked like. And then we leave the house or we start our homeschooling procedures and then what it looks like after school and then the dinner time. And so those blocks of times during your day, you've had some structure, you have some routine. Well, during this uncertain time, right, what we found working with families is we've got a kind of two types happening, right? We've either completely disconnected from some routine because of all the interruption and all the unexpectedness that's taken place. And so we have to get back to what we were doing a little bit before. So it's not sleeping in, right, for our children who want to sleep in longer because now they're doing their school online. It's not sleeping in till 8. It's getting back to waking up at whatever that was, 6 or 6:30. Okay, maybe there's a little wiggle room. It's getting up like you and getting dressed like you were going to school, right? It's having your breakfast and moving that way. For others, they're completely structured around the process, and they have to create a little bit flexibility because they aren't leaving the home. And so that's what we mean a little bit. Start inserting what you were doing before from the basics, getting dressed, getting ready. And then also with the school stuff, right? How does your child know how to navigate the day? Is that visualized for them? Do they have specific folders that are dedicated to their classes like they might do when they're on campus, creating that at home? You have anything to add to that?
No, I think what Kim is saying is, you know, the other part is, I think most of us, while we were we were sharing roles with either working, right? We had separation of role, and as separation of role, we created time constraints to get to our jobs. So then we were more efficient around what we were doing. And so as we have now merged these roles, sometimes we uninstall things. You know, I know my daughter thought the first couple of weeks that it was summer break, you know, without the vacation. And so I think reinstalling things that were helping us be successful and efficient and those habits, now we may not be getting dressed to go to work, but we're using the same habits. And sometimes we do have to act as if we have to engage those skills.
Okay, next question. They're coming in like crazy, just so you know.
Okay.
Have you found any specific strategies when dealing with kiddos' severely increased anxiety and subsequent behaviors without losing the progress we've made?
Yeah, that's a good question. You start this one?
No, I think in terms of, I think anxiety, right? I think, and without kind of losing some of the progress, right? You're talking about. So I think for a lot of young people, right? Habit building was such an integral part of maybe some of their success, being able to count on things being on schedule, and now the shape of it is changing. And there's no timeline for when things are going to start up again. So I think for lots of young people, what we have been trying to do, right, is first, everybody has feelings around us. So we have to kind of validate validate young people. Yes, this is not great news, right? This is not great news. And yeah, you're supposed to be upset. You're supposed to be frustrated. You're supposed to be anxious. So what we find is a couple of things. Right now, does the problem have the right feeling attached to it? And then the other thing is the size of the feeling bigger than the problem? And how do we help manage that? The other thing too is being able then to also, as we're taking someone off one track, putting them on another track, because this isn't never, so for example, if someone's, and I know this kind of like, I have a daughter that's going into middle school, and she lost a graduation party and her birthday all in the same, week. My son, who we've had to take to different things that he's not going to currently, when they can't see that there's a new track, they continually want to stay on the old track. So building, once again, a new track for someone, helping them manage to have the right feeling for the situation. Also, how I respond in those moments will also generate the feeling that they connect to.
Okay, next question. What is the best approach to give kids bad news? For example, now the summer camps are also closed. I have teenagers. How would you address giving them bad news?
Well, I think, and I think for everybody, this is going to be different depending on their child's tolerance, right, and their threshold in receiving specific information. And so, my first thought is I would reflect on how you shared information at the start of this pandemic, right, with the school closures and the loss of activities, and was the way that you delivered that information, was it effective or was it ineffective, right? So that would be your starting point. And then to the language that you use. If you label information as good or bad, that impacts people's reactions, right? And so language is extremely critical as you're delivering information, and also the pace in which you're delivering information. They don't have to hear it all at once, right? Space it out, right? Timing is incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is each event is so separate and unique, right? As I look around my own neighborhood and I see high school graduates that don't get to go to graduation, but yet they have their photo on the lawn, and they have, people are celebrating in different ways. I've gone now to 3 drive-by birthday parties. All of these things, I think it is unfair to lots of young people.
Mhm.
And we don't want to lose the point of it being unfair. What we have to do, though, is, as we are talking about, this is unfair, and I can't imagine how you feel as we're sliding in the alternative plan, right? Because I think for many young people right now, many young people are completionists, right? Many of our young people in this group are completionists. They are professional completionists, right? They want to be able to complete things. So all we're doing is giving them something new to complete. So maybe your birthday is not going to look like that, but it is going to look like this. I think there's a natural expiration date on feelings that we have to teach too.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I have had to isolate waiting for test results. Could you address ideas for parents planning ahead in case they cannot take care of their children?
Yeah, that's
A good question, and a heavy one, right? And I don't think, being completely transparent, right? I don't know if there's a right answer for this, right?
And if I could,
Yeah.
just to share with you, so I'm from back east, so I'm from New York. I have lots of friends and family. We actually had a family member that was in a similar situation, and it was mind-blowing how she got ahead of this. She literally created a series of videos to talk it through the steps, okay? And the fact of the matter was, I mean, she knew her child, right? And I don't know this person we're talking about, but being able to say to a 14-year-old, if this is what happens, this is what I need you to do for you, this is what I need you to do for your brother, okay? And literally laid out a series of how-to videos, which blew my mind, because I would have been like, oh, I want to go to the social story, but she created video version. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes. I think we've all seen the horror stories back in New York where people had to do videos to say goodbye to loved ones in the worst case scenarios when they were critically ill. But yes, I mean, it is something as special needs parents, we always have to think about caretaking for our kids and the challenges when we don't have help in the home right now.
Absolutely.
Struggling. Any other questions? I'm looking. I think we got most of them. If anyone has any other questions, go ahead, and you can speak out loud as well. You don't have to type it in the chat. Okay, I think that might be it. You guys were awesome. This is very relevant and helpful information for all of our families. I know that Katie's the tech queen between us, and she is going to post this so that our families can view this at their leisure on our Facebook page, right, Katie?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, good deal.
We have a couple more questions that came up. So they want to know any tips for discussing looking for a job for a 17-year-old girl. So I know it's difficult during these times because, the hiring looks different and jobs look different. But do you guys have any tips on that?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one, because it's like one of the things I know, because we're inundated with young people asking things like, driving lessons and jobs and stuff like that. And so, we have really been looking at, trying to come up with virtual resources, for stuff like this right now. I think also it really depends too, right? Like I look at the Walmart around the corner from me and there's a million young people, but, is that the job that the family wants that child to have, So I think with stuff like that, kind of what the family's comfortable with, We don't necessarily, because a lot of the resources that we were connecting to currently are hitting pause. So that's certainly something that we can research, and we are constantly trying to research. And so Katie, as I find out this stuff, we find out, we'll definitely shuttle it to you.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hey, Ginger, can you go unmute yourself so you can say the name of this?
Yes. My daughter is on the spectrum, but she also has developed teotrichomania in the last 6 months. And I'm wondering if that is something that either of you have worked with, and if that, I don't know, I'm looking for therapy for her.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk offline with you. I mean, there are a certain, I think for many of the young people, there are behaviors that I think are connected to obviously anxiety. And I think for some kids, it's not just anxiety, then it's kind of habit forming kinds of things. So be more than happy to kind of, I wouldn't want to just give you some a small answer to something that requires a bigger one. So Katie, maybe you can just share that info.
Yeah, we would be happy to be able just to talk more with any of you that are interested in what it is that our center does, the services that we offer. Again, offline, feel free to connect with Katie to receive our information, and happy to kind of walk you through that process to see if it's something that we'd be able to help with.
I'm going to interrupt. Can you guys do just like a 1 minute or so overview of your services at the clinic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So the Relationship-Based Autism Center is a program within Child and Family Support Services, which is a behavioral health agency. And Paul and I developed this program just over 4 years ago, and really wanted to tailor our work around the whole family unit. Working with caregivers and siblings and extended family that are connected to children on the spectrum, in an effort to really create more family unity and connection, alleviate some of those stressors and barriers that are creating some disconnect and unwanted behavioral challenges. And so at the core of what we do, it's a counseling program, but it's a family counseling program that specifically works with children, adolescents, and teens diagnosed with ASD. Through our services, we offer the family counseling, skills training, which is an extension to our counseling program, where we have skills trainers then that'll either meet with your family in the office or community and home to be able to start teaching those step-by-step mechanical pieces to what's being worked on in the counseling room. Offer social therapy groups that actually not only works with the child, but parents in a separate forum, so that parents are continually learning alongside with their child. We really come from a skill-based perspective that in order to change or reduce or increase behaviors, you've really got to work from a skill standpoint. So, and how we do that, we use a lot of different methodologies, a lot of different modalities.
So consulting the parents as well as the child on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's actually, we start our work working with the caregiver for a period of time before we would introduce the child into our care. And we go into greater detail as we kind of provide an orientation to each family. But we find it extremely critical that this is a family process to create sustainability throughout these young people's lives.
Yeah, and I think at the core, like Kim is saying, it is really family focused. In addition to that, not just mom and dad, but extended family, siblings, other. I think what people often say is they can kind of feel what feels different is the fact that we are creating lots of welcome mats for our family. And we also try to connect family to family, because as we all know, when you're in this community, you can feel like you're on the perimeter real quick. So being able to kind of introduce that, you know, there is a community of family out there, and that building connection just also means for us connecting families to families, very much kind of like what's happening right here. So.
Okay, Paul, the big question, been asked a couple times.
Uh-oh.
Those that have aged out of your program.
Oh, I know where this came. I know where this came from. This, yeah.
No, there's several, not just the one with the big C.
Oh.
So adults, okay, if you guys aren't going to provide it, do you have any other options or recommendations for people that can help? Because these are tough times and people are needing it.
Yeah.
With the
No, and I know. And in all seriousness, Katie, I know we chuckle because it seems like the question of the last 4 years, to be quite honest. And so we know that adult services are challenging to find, and effective ones at that understand the ASD mind. We are looking to exploring right now that, and we say that with all seriousness. It has become a 2020 focus for us now that we have this program that is very big, and we have a team of 18 at this point. This was a 2-person show when we came over from our former agency and built our back. And so we're at this place to where now we are building more branches of service to meet the needs of more families in this community. So the best thing that I think we could say is stand by. But in the meantime, please continue to ask for resources. Our partnerships with you, Katie, and several of you on this call tonight, when we learn of resources, we are so happy to pass them along. We don't want to see the work that we've invested and the time and relationships that we have built be impacted in a negative way. So it's a big goal. So
yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
And also for our families, where are you guys located, and do you take private health insurance?
Yeah. So our Maricopa office is located off of I-10 and Elliott. That's where we kind of house our center, our counseling rooms. We have 2 points of entrance into the program. We take private pay families, that is out of pocket, and then families can go back and provide statements to their insurance or ESA, what have you. And then the other side is DDD and state. So 2 different entrance points, all offering the same services. It will be interesting at the end of this, whenever, when this finish line comes, what counseling, right, and skills training, what additional ways we're able to connect with people. Right now, it's been primarily telehealth, similar to what we're doing right now, and if that's going to actually become an option after this pandemic, in an effort to connect with more and more families, that distance is a barrier, right? So again, that's another one that we're all standing by to see what the outcome is.
So some people, it cut out on them a little bit, but you said private pay and then DDD, which is Altex. So there are behavioral health benefits through Altex, right? So if you look on the back of your Altex card, whether you have Mercy Care or United, on the back it says behavioral health, right? And they just call that number, and that's how you can get services paid through them. So a lot of our families unfortunately don't know a lot about behavioral health services that they have options for, and so that's also part of our mission, is to let them know about some of these things, because we often only think about doing habilitation and respite and ABA and those things. So
yeah,
important.
Yeah, and if you have any questions around that, send myself or Paul an email, and we'll get you connected to the right person on our program that can kind of walk you through that process to see who or what you're connected to better be able to support you through the process, because it can get complicated, especially if you have different providers through different systems of care. So more than
And we
willing
did
to
put both of your emails on here on the chat and the website, but we'll also post it on our Facebook page for Evan as well. And then you should be listed hopefully on the website, so anyone looking for those services can